Hello, good evening, and welcome to this edition of Town Talk. I'm Paul Knight, and I'll be your guest for the next 60 minutes or so as we continue to try and find out what's really going on in our community, and in fact tonight, what's really going on in our state. And to help me with that quest is the probable Republican nominee for U.S. Senate, Mr. Mitt Romney. Excuse me, Mitt.
That's all right.
Welcome to the show, Mitt.
Thank you. Good to be here, Paul.
Thanks for stopping in on your whirlwind tour of the Merrimack Valley.
Yeah, it's been a full day today.
It has. I saw your itinerary, and this is the summit on the trip.
That's exactly right.
That's the way I look at it anyway. Mitt, for the viewers who may not be familiar with your name and who may stumble on it just as I did, would you please give us a quick bio?
Sure. I was born 47 years ago to George and Lenore Romney. My dad was a businessman, and after 50-some-odd years, he decided to go into politics and ran for governor of his state. I worked in his campaigns. My mom also ran for U.S. Senate. He was a three-term governor. She didn't make it as a senator. He ran for president, lost to Richard Nixon in the Republican primaries. I came to Massachusetts 23 years ago to go to school, and I've never left. I've got 5 sons, and raising them has been my real life. But then about 20 years ago, after coming out of graduate school at Harvard in law and business, I went into a small business and worked my way up to the top. And then more recently, I started a little company of my own, and the business was one which was involved in starting companies. A strange little business. We called it venture capital.
Right.
We would provide capital to little companies to get them going, and some of those little companies became so successful that they're now pretty big. We put the first money in the first Staples store, for instance, and now that it employs 12,000 people with revenues of about $2 billion, it's more than a little business.
Sure. Public as well, I believe.
Yes, it's a big public company.
Right. So your background and forte is, in fact, the world of business.
Yeah, it's been working with small businesses, some of which have become large, some have not made it at all, others have stayed small, but it's been helping small businesses get going, growing, finding them the capital they need, helping create a business plan that works, and then helping to create literally thousands of jobs by virtue of getting those businesses going.
Right. Now, the next several days are going to be crucial for Mitt Romney and his other Republican challenger, John Lakian, because they're going to battle it out for the nomination on September 20th in the Republican primary. And as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, that Mitt is in fact the probable candidate, if you don't mind me saying so. I'm sure you will.
I certainly don't, no.
To face Ted Kennedy in November. Mitt, tell me please, and the viewers, from your perspective, what are the issues, not only in your immediate campaign, but the one hopefully you'll take to Ted Kennedy?
Well, it's interesting. I've been up and down the state now, and around the state several times, and I've been in the Merrimack Valley many times. And the things people are talking about are the same, I'll say 3 major issues. Number 1 in people's mind is crime. Crime in the street, in their home, in the schools. They want us to be tougher on crime. Number 2, I believe, is welfare. People just don't feel that welfare is working for us. We're spending $300 billion as a nation on welfare, but we're not getting enough people back into the workforce, and that's a concern. And then there's the overriding issue that never goes away, that people always want to know what we're doing, and that relates to job creation. Are we creating the kind of economy that is attracting jobs to Massachusetts, or are we losing jobs? And that's the question that I hear everywhere I go. And that's really, that's one of the things that got me into this race. I've got 5 sons, as I mentioned, and you need to get up in the morning and look at them across the breakfast table and wonder, what are they going to do? What's their future going to be like? And unless we can bring more jobs and more small businesses to our community, then their future won't be the same future that we knew when we were getting out of school. Right. Now let's take the first one of those, crime.
Yeah. The House and Senate just passed a crime bill, narrow margin in the Senate, but they still passed it. Was that a $30 billion boondoggle, or are we actually going to see some new policemen on the streets of Amesbury, Salisbury, and Merrimack?
Well, it's not entirely a boondoggle. There are dollars out of that $30 billion that will be well spent. We need more jails, and about $10 billion of that amount goes to construction of new jails. And you find that the more people are locked up and the longer they're locked up, the lower the crime rate is. So I'm in favor of that. We're also going to spend about $13 billion on more police. Now that's over 5 or 6 years. So, you know, we're talking about not $13 billion a year, but $13 billion divided by 5 or 6 years. And will we see more police? Yes. Will we see hundreds of more police in Amesbury? No. It's a start. It's some help with a program called community policing, puts more police from the community on the street. I think it's a good idea, but it's something which I think needs to be expanded by the federal government. And then there's about $6 billion of what they call prevention programs, some of which I like. I like the Violence Against Women's Act. I don't think we have been sensitive enough to the needs of protecting the victims of violent crime who are women. And I think our police and our judicial system need to be trained and given the support to do that better. And then there are other programs I like too. I like the idea of keeping schools open after hours to make sure that there are places for kids to go for athletics and art and other things, and part of the money goes there. So some of it I like. There are a few things I don't, and there's some parts of the bill that I wish were not there, and there's some things that our current Senator, Ted Kennedy, took out. By his lone vote, he took out some of the toughest measures that were in that crime bill. And if I go to Washington, I will introduce something called the Crime Act Booster Bill to put back into the bill some of the things that were taken out.
Give me a for instance on what was taken out.
Well, the Senate passed a version which included an amendment by Carol Moseley Braun, a Democrat, which said that if a juvenile is being tried for rape or murder, that juvenile shall be tried as an adult. Well, it was passed like that by the Senate. It then went off to a committee, and at that committee, the vote was even as to whether to leave it in or out, except for Ted Kennedy's deciding vote. He took it out. And so that provision's no longer there. So juveniles don't have to be prosecuted and tried as adults. That's wrong. And there are others like that. Mandatory sentences for pushing drugs to children, mandatory sentences for using guns in crimes. He took that out. I want to put it back in.
Gotcha. Okay. In the same vein of crime, Massachusetts at the moment seems to be in a fever for capital punishment. Most recently because of the slaying of the state trooper down on the South Shore.
Right, right.
Some states do, of course, it's well documented, have capital punishment. Where do you stand on the issue? I'm
in favor of capital punishment. I went to law school a long time ago, and I remember in my criminal law class, the professor got up and said, capital punishment doesn't deter crime. And I raised my hand and I said, how do you know? In my view, capital punishment for certain forms of violent crime, murdering cops, for instance, cold-blooded killing, that kind of act is going to be deterred, perhaps not 100% of the time, but even if only 10% of the time, it is worth deterring that kind of crime, and I think capital punishment does it. And so I support capital punishment. And other forms of tough punishment to keep people off the streets who commit crimes against human beings. I mean, for too long, we've been concerned about rehabilitating and getting these violent criminals back into society. In my view, we've gone far too far. We need to come back in the other direction and say, look, we need to have these people off the streets. If they've committed a crime, like the fellow that killed the state trooper, if he's committed a manslaughter, killed another human being, he shouldn't be back out on the street until he's either so old he's not going to do something or ever. We just can't afford to have people who show that kind of inclination on our streets.
Right. And so you're in favor not only of federal death penalty, but you'd like to see it all over for federal crimes, but also for nationwide, statewide.
Yeah, the federal government is going to expand the death penalty for federal crimes, and I'm very much in favor of states like Massachusetts also having a death penalty. It's up to the state, but I can assure you I would be very supportive of that kind of legislation at the state level.
Okay. Let's move on to international affairs. I understand that President Clinton is going to go on the air tonight and explain why he wants to invade Haiti. If you were in the Senate today and the President gave you the courtesy of asking your permission if he could do that, how would you vote?
I'd tell him not to do it. I'd tell him not to invade Haiti. And there are lots of good reasons to do it. We've got our pride stuck in this, and Clinton has said a lot of volatile things. But you have to stop and say, what is our foreign policy as a nation? When do we apply military force? When do we send in our fighting men and women and put them in harm's way? And in my view, we only do that when there is a substantial, legitimate U.S. interest involved. Like we have citizens under attack, or we have major parts of our economy under attack, or our national security is at risk. Then we send in troops. But those things aren't at play here in Haiti. And in my view, we should restrain ourselves and instead work diplomatically, use every incentive we can economically, embargo if we must, but we're not going to put our men and women in harm's way. Or else, where else do we invade?
Right.
I mean, do we invade Cuba next? They also have a tyrant. They also don't have democratically controlled political system. They don't have human rights, so we must be ready to invade Cuba next. And then China, and then it strikes me that we need to have a policy that is consistent and that people around the world recognize that we who are the superpower use that strength wisely, clearly, according to some clearly thought through standards, but that we're not going to go out and invade a country just because it's small and weak.
Right, right. I would imagine that a proposed invasion of Cuba would get more support than an invasion of Haiti, I guess.
You're probably right.
You know.
The justification might be greater in that case, although I think that their threat to our national security has also waned.
Yeah, I would agree. And on a less serious note, we get most of our baseballs from Haiti. And now there's a baseball strike, so why do we even have to go in there? We don't need baseballs. No one's ever thought of that.
That argument I had not heard. That's
No.
going to get you on the evening news, I'm sure.
No, I haven't heard that. It's an original. Anyway, let's go on to welfare reform. You brought the subject up earlier. Welfare reform is a huge, huge subject, and everyone's got their own particular ways of reforming welfare. Tell us what yours are.
Well, at the heart of welfare reform, in my view, is work. We need to get people who are on welfare when they're able-bodied, and if they don't have preschoolers at home, we need to get them back into the workforce. So how do you go about doing that? I agree with Governor Weld's approach, which is get people who are able-bodied back to work. Give them either a private sector job, give them a government job, let them even work in a voluntary charity kind of job, but give them the dignity of being able to work while they're receiving benefits. That's number one. Number two, I like to get the private sector involved with people who are on welfare. And the way to do that, in my view, is to say, if you've got a little business and you're willing to hire someone who's on welfare, we're going to give you a tax credit for having done that, for hiring and training someone off of welfare. And that doesn't cost us anything, because if we get somebody hired by a little business, they're no longer on welfare.
Right.
So that tax credit is cheap indeed.
Plus the person, if he's working, is paying taxes anyway.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
So I want to get people that are on welfare back into the workforce. Now there's some other incentives in the welfare system I'd change. Right now, for instance, if I'm on welfare and I have a child, and I get a certain payment in cash per month, in addition to my food stamps and housing allowance and the medical allowance. But if I have another child, I get an even larger check each month. And the more children I have, the more money I get each month. Right. That doesn't make sense to me. Working men and women don't get more money each time they have more children. They've got to go through tough decisions. Can we afford another child? I don't think people who are on welfare should be divorced from the recognition that there are economic consequences to their decision to have more children.
Mm-hmm. We spoke before we went on the air very quickly about the power of the incumbent. Now you are facing, in all likelihood, after the 20th, a very powerful incumbent, 32 years on the job. That's Ted Kennedy, of course. And by the way, my guest next week is Ted Kennedy, but I'll get into that a bit later. Now, is the decision that voters have to make, Mitt, this year a vote against Ted Kennedy, or is it a vote for Mitt Romney?
I believe it's a vote for Mitt Romney, but there's a bit of both in there, and let me tell you why. Ted Kennedy is a very powerful senator. He's been there a long time, and he'll be the first to say, gee, I know Washington, my experiences in Washington, and I have all this clout in Washington. And he has clout, and he uses that clout to direct our country and our state in a particular course. I think the course we're going is wrong. I don't think America is headed down the right road. I want to take a different course. I want work with welfare. I want the death penalty. I want punishments for criminals that are swift and sure and tough. I want to make sure that we create more jobs and that government doesn't just think that jobs happen, but rather government helps create more industries and create more small businesses. That's a very different course than Ted Kennedy is taking. And so it's really a vote of a decision between two paths. Do you want to go down the path Ted Kennedy represents, and he has championed all these years, which has gotten us where we are, massive debt, massive taxes, failed welfare, failed crime, or do you want to go down an entirely different path? And it's the one that's being spoken about by me in this case.
Right, I see. Okay. And as I said, Ted Kennedy is my guest next week, and he will be asked very similar questions as I'm asking Mitt tonight concerning the Merrimack Valley as well. You've just come from a very long day in the Merrimack Valley, and I'm wondering what your ideas are on how we can generate some jobs for the valley. If you've been to Lawrence, you see empty mills, Andover. Amesbury has more empty mills than we want or know what to do with. And I mention empty mills because some people say the future of America is in small businesses. Perfect maybe for that scenario. Tell us please, Mitt, how would you generate jobs for the Merrimack Valley?
Well, first I'd do for the Merrimack Valley what I've been doing for myself for the last 20 years, and that is go around the country and try and recruit small businesses, big businesses, to come to Massachusetts. I'd show them real estate that's empty and say we can get this to you cheap. I'd show them how we'd cut red tape for them, get credit for them, and allow them to grow in Massachusetts. And that's been going on around the country by every other state. We got to make sure that Massachusetts is participating in that as well. And I would be, along with Governor Weld, one of the best ambassadors and marketers for businesses coming to Massachusetts and coming to the Merrimack Valley. In addition to that, I do what has to be done to make small businesses grow and thrive. Get more capital, more trained people, and get unnecessary government regulation off their back. More capital, let me tell you, when an economy grows, it generates capital. It generates money. It can go to banks. But our economy has been taking all of that capital, not all of it, but a lot of it, and pouring it into growing government, because government's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I'd say stop growing government, stop these huge deficits, balance the budget so that that capital of our economy can go in to help small businesses grow. I'd also put in place a middle-class savings account, an incentive for middle-class individuals to put money aside, tax-free, money they could take out as they need it for their needs, that grows, and that capital also is in banks and in credit unions, which small businesses can go to and get loans. So we got more money for small businesses in our communities. I want more trained people, and I want training to be done largely by employers, so I'd give them tax credits for doing that. And government regulation, we kill a lot of our businesses because they get overwhelmed with all the paperwork and the regulations that government puts on them. I want to cut out all the regulations that have been there too long and that don't make economic sense.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I was talking to someone the other day, and we have so many laws. Some politician was saying, well, in my tenure we've put 500 laws on the books. Well, that's wonderful, but why not take 250 off the books? You know, it's so difficult to repeal laws. I wonder how many laws there are in the books. Thousands and thousands.
If I saw a movie that you may have seen called Dave, where a guy who was a pretend guy became president of the United States, and an accountant was in talking to him about the government, and he looked at the books of the federal government and he said, you know, if I ran my business like this, I'd be broke. And the truth of the matter is, if we ran our businesses like we run the government, we would all be broke.
That's right.
And government has never learned to kill turkeys, to get rid of old programs that don't work anymore. They just add new program after new program. The bureaucracy gets bigger and bigger. It demands, more and more money to feed it, and it becomes a monster. And we've got to say, the monster's got to be shot. We've got to go back, and I don't mean the whole government, but I mean we've got to cut back and look at what's working, and invest in those things that are working, and get rid of the other. And the problem, when you send people down to Washington who've never had a day of work in the private sector, who've never worked in a little business, who've seen some fail, some lose, some gained, some grow, if they've never had that experience, they don't know that you got to cut out the old and the stuff that's not working.
Right. Yep. And actually, that movie Dave is very good. I enjoyed it very much. If you're looking for some good entertainment with a story to it, watch Dave. It's good. It's good. I think you would agree, Mitt, that the state of Massachusetts has probably the best high education in the country.
Yeah.
Equal to California for sure, but MITs, Harvards, you name it, they're here.
Couldn't be better.
The educational system at the bedrock level, public school systems, not only in Massachusetts but nationwide, are truly crumbling.
Yeah.
Two-part question. How would you stop that erosion? And two, do you think throwing money at any problem, i.e. education, solves the problem?
Well, let's go back and ask ourselves the first part of your question. Why is it that we have such terrific high education, not only in Massachusetts, but actually in all of America? Why is our higher education so successful? And then our kindergarten through 12th grade so challenged, and in some places just a disaster? And I think if you stand back and look at it, you say, in higher education, Parents and kids can choose what school they go to. They can get a government loan regardless of whether it's a public school or not a public school. And they choose whichever school they want. And there's some schools some universities that are geared to the very brightest, and others that are geared to the more engineering oriented, and others that are the more liberal arts oriented. And everybody has a great degree of choice in the schools they go to. But when you come down to the local schools, you're told what school you go to. And I believe if we want to make our local schools better schools, we need to apply that elixir of competition. Let parents and students decide which school they're going to go to. Private, parochial, public. I think that'll make our public schools better. I think it'll make our private and parochial schools better. I think it'll bring the cost of education down, and it will bring back to our schools something that's been missing over the last couple of decades, and that is discipline. Problems in our schools are not how much money we're spending. Oh, I'm sure that all of our schools could be better if they got more money, but that's really not the answer. The answer is more discipline. And I think we get discipline if schools are competing with one another, and the schools that survive are those where parents say, I'm sending my kid over here because they got great discipline, they got a good after-school program, they're tough. That's what I want for my son or daughter.
Right. And also, they started, in other parts of the world, they started rating schools. The government says, well, we have so many A's, we have so many B's going into the next grade. And of course, they're measured how much money they get by the number of high results they get.
Yeah, there's actually a program in Florida where teachers are given a bonus for the number of students they have in their class that pass certain advanced placement tests. And they say if you get a number of students that do particularly well, you'll get a larger bonus that year. Now they can either keep it as teachers, or some school systems have it go into the school system, but it's remarkable. It's had a very dramatic effect on the quality of education and on the number of students that pass these achievement tests in some schools that are trying that kind of program.
Right, and it all comes down to competition and achievement.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to let you take a 3-minute break to gather your thoughts, and then we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to come back and tackle the behemoth called healthcare. We haven't really challenged that one. Before we go into the break, we are doing something a little bit different tonight. There's a play being shown at St. Joseph's Church this weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 3 o'clock. It's called The Cat in the Castle. And it's quite an interesting play. It was over at the Firehouse in Newburyport. Anyway, we have 4 pairs of tickets available to the first callers tonight, if you choose to take them, of course. But if you'd like to go see Cat in the Castle and speak to Mr. Mitt Romney, by all means, get on the horn and give us a call. 388-5900. The phone lines are open, and we'll be back in about 90 seconds. Stay tuned.
Most car dealers want to sell you a car. We want to sell you a dealership.
Hi, I'm David Prescott, sales manager.
Hi, I'm Alan Veit, business manager.
Hi, I'm Frank Insero, sales.
Hi, I'm Scott Dollar for Chevrolet and Geo Service.
Hi, I'm Rod Lewis, parts manager.
Hi, Charlie Decker, Volkswagen Service.
You've just seen 6 reasons why you'll be sold on Yo Chevrolet Geo Volkswagen.
Yo Chevrolet Geo Volkswagen.
Fruits and vegetables give you more than meets the eye. You get delicious tastes and great variety. Lots of vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Good food for a healthier you. Learn more about fruits, vegetables, and lower cancer risk. For free recipes, write the American Institute for Cancer Research.
Cool. Now remember what you learned in Hunter Education.
This father isn't taking chances with safety. He's making sure his children know how to hunt safely. Knowing when it's safe to shoot.
Safety on.
Avoiding areas where people live.
That's my girl. You have to stay alert. Know where everyone is at all times.
Because hunting safety isn't inherited. You have to teach it.
Okay, we're off.
For more information on Hunter Education in Massachusetts, call 508-792-7434.
Welcome back, folks, to Town Talk. My guest tonight is Mitt Romney, the likely Republican candidate to challenge Senator Edward Kennedy this year, of course, in November. And we're barreling through some of the issues of the day. It seems like the United States really has a lot of serious, heavyweight domestic issues on our plate, more than I think in the last 20 years. as opposed to, say, the Soviet Union and all those international issues. So we have so many serious issues in front of us. And one of the biggest issues, Mitt, that we all are staring right in the eye is health care. We're in trouble with health care. You know, 12–13% of our gross domestic product is spent on health care, which is 5–6 points higher than any other industrialized country. Certainly we have wonderful health care, like we do have wonderful education, but we just can't seem to get it right for everybody. Tell us, please, how another two-parter, if you don't mind. Tell us, please, your perfect scenario for universal health care, assuming, of course, you believe in universal health care. Okay, and also tell us, where do you think we're all going to end up in 12 months? And don't worry, you don't have to remember all that. I'll help you through
You can give it to me piece by piece.
But what is your perfect scenario, Mitt, for universal health care?
Well, first we've got to reform the health care insurance rules to make sure that people don't have to worry about losing insurance if they change jobs or if they get an illness as they change jobs. The pre-existing illness problem should be taken off the board. How do you get all of our people covered? Well, there's some people who are working or maybe not working that can't begin to afford coverage. We need to provide subsidy for people who can't get coverage, can't afford it on their own. So number one, we need some to be subsidized. How about those who can afford but haven't chosen to acquire insurance? Well, the next thing we need to do is make sure that we don't make it harder for an individual or a sole proprietor to get insurance than for a corporation. And so I'd like to make the same rules of deduction available for individuals as for corporations. Then you got the problem that it costs more to buy insurance if you're an individual or part of a small group than if you're part of a big group. I'd like to have anti-discrimination provisions such that insurance rates are not so disparate between the big and the small acquirers. And finally, I think we need some access provisions which say every employer must offer to their employee, for the employee to purchase, if he or she wants, several choices of health care. And that this might be a managed care program like an HMO, perhaps an indemnity program like Blue Cross, as well as a catastrophic care policy that includes an annual physical, perhaps, and that also has a medical savings plan, which allows people to put money aside for their deductible. If each individual had those kinds of choices as part of groups that their employer had entered into, and if they had the premiums deductible, and the rates were not different between big companies and small companies, then you're going to see the vast majority of Americans picking up that insurance and getting themselves covered. And that's the way I believe we move to universal coverage. I don't want employer mandates to be put in place because I'm afraid we lose jobs. The last thing this state needs is to have jobs lost. So I don't want to go that way. I want to get to universal coverage by people having incentives, access, anti-discrimination provisions to get them that coverage. The big issue, though, is cost. How are we going to get health care costs down? And there, the Kennedy and Clinton approach is, gee, health care is very expensive, so we better have government take it over and manage it. Well, I don't know anything that the government takes over and manages that becomes less costly and more efficient. So in my view, that's not the direction to go. If you want to get costs down, we got to figure out how to make health care more like everything else in our society, driven by, you know, whether we're smart shoppers or not, and let the consumer take over and let us determine where the quality and price is best. And I think we got to make health care more competitive, more price information before we buy health care services, better quality information on which hospital and which doctor really provides what kind of quality service, and then finally make sure every one of us has a stake in whether we're a smart shopper or not. Namely, if we buy our health care products wisely, we save, and if we don't, it costs us.
Right. We'll talk a bit more about that. We're going to take a call.
Okay.
And we'll get back to health care in a moment. Hello, you're on Town Talk.
Hi, Mr. Romney.
Hello there.
How you doing?
Just fine, thanks.
Good, thanks. I was recently reading in the newspaper, and I was a little disturbed to find out that you tried to force a woman to give up her infant for adoption. Why do you think she was unfit to be a mother? Was it because she was a single parent or because she was out of work?
Well, let's go back and change the facts and get them back to truth, all right?
Okay.
First of all, I did not try and force someone to give up a child for adoption. I spoke with someone who was a single mom, who had 2 children, was not married, didn't have any work, was on welfare, and I provided my advice that I considered her particular condition one which suggested that she should seriously consider adoption. Now, there's some other circumstances at play as well. And because my advice was given in a private counseling session, I'm not free to describe in particular her personal circumstances, but let me say, and I say this with her permission, that there were very difficult family problems that were involved in that case, and in light of those problems and her total lack of income and my concern for the welfare of the child and her own welfare, I thought it best for her to seriously consider adoption. But the choice was hers. Of course, she made her own choice, and the vast majority of people I know in the same circumstance choose to keep that child, and that's their right, and a totally an appropriate choice. And my advice is also my right, and given the particular circumstances involved, I think I gave the right advice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Caller?
Yes?
I'm sorry to lighten the moment here, but did you get your tickets? I'm trying to give away 4 pairs of tickets. Did you get them?
No, because I don't have any infant.
Okay.
Okay, thank you anyways.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Let's see there. Hello, you're on Town Talk.
Yes, I actually have 2 questions for Mr. Romney.
Okay.
They both deal with health care. If right now you were in the Senate, Mr. Romney,
yes,
and you to vote for you to vote to support one specific health care plan, let me turn on the TV. Which plan would you vote to support?
Well, I'm not going to choose one plan. I'm not going to choose the Gephardt plan. I would definitely not vote for the Gephardt plan. I'm not going to vote for the Mitchell plan. The Mitchell plan would put roughly, according to the New York Times, 100 million people on a government-subsidized health care plan. That, in my view, would bankrupt us and is a huge mistake and would add an enormous tax burden to the American people. So I don't want the Mitchell plan either. The Dole plan has many aspects to it that I think are attractive. I'm studying the Dole plan. I think that the subsidy is appropriate. I think the changes in health care rules are appropriate. I think the subsidy is smaller than I would like to have. I think I'd like to subsidize more than the Dole plan currently envisions. But there are major aspects of it that I think are working in the right direction.
Good. Well, I know there's a lot of things to discuss there, but now you specifically, I want to ask you about. You've commented a lot. You've been involved in businesses and helping to start businesses.
Right.
Like Staples, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And Staples, I mean, it's not a company that pays a lot and really high jobs.
I wouldn't say that.
For instance, does Staples pay enough to provide health care insurance, decent wages to its employees?
Well, Staples does provide health insurance for its employees, and Staples employees start at one end of the spectrum and go all the way up. Staples is an employer of some 12,000 people. It has executive-level people, people in marketing and sales, people in purchasing. It has store managers and district managers, and it has department managers, and of course it has people that are checkout clerks and shelf stockers. It has a whole range of positions, as does any retail company. And I'm proud of the fact that it provides employment opportunities for those at the entry level, as well as those all the way up into high executive levels, for all positions. And a health care plan, which I think we need to have, is one where if people cannot afford insurance, they receive subsidy to be able to purchase that insurance. And if they can afford insurance, then they're not discriminated against because they can't deduct the insurance or because the rates charged to them as an individual are higher than the rates charged for a large corporation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Good night. Hello, you're on Town Talk.
Yes, Mr. Romney. As our forces are heading to Haiti now, I was wondering how you felt about our military forces helping these countries who are fighting for their democracies. As Jean Kirkpatrick recently wrote in an editorial, there are so many countries that are involved that are fighting for their democracy. Should we get involved in all of these countries, or should we just keep a hands-off policy?
Well, you know, it's interesting. In the businesses I've been involved with, before you do anything, you start off by saying, what are our objectives, and what's our strategy to achieve those objectives? And if I'm not the president, and I'm not trying to be, but if I were the president, or we're working with, within the Department of State, I'd say, what are our objectives? Let's lay them out. And then let's figure out what we're planning on doing in each theater of the world. And with those things in mind, you have a strategy. You decide where you're going to go. I don't think we have that right now. I don't have any sense as whether we know whether we're going or not. But first you start there. One key aspect of any foreign policy or any strategy is when you will use your military. And I don't think you take weapons and shoot at people and lose lives unless there's a U.S. interest at stake. I don't want us to be the policeman or the do-gooder of the world deciding which administration we're for and which we're not for, and deciding who's right and wrong, and sending in our aircraft carriers and our bombers and our people in all of the different conflicts of the world. I think we have to limit ourselves to places where we know we have U.S. interests at stake, we defend those interests, and then in those other areas where there are conflicts or humanitarian problems, there we suffice ourselves by getting involved diplomatically, we work economically, we use every force with all the other nations of the world to try and put pressure where pressure needs to be put, but we don't put our fighting men and women in harm's way unless there's a significant U.S. interest at stake. Does that make sense to you?
That makes very good sense, and you have my vote.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, caller. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, thanks for watching. Good night. Okay. Hello, you're on Town Talk.
Yes, how you doing?
Fine.
Good.
Hi, this is Mr. Romney.
Yes.
Yes, my brother lives in Germany and works in Germany, and their healthcare system, of course, their taxes are high, but the healthcare is free. And I was wondering what you thought about the the healthcare plan in Germany as well as Canada, if we might be able to put something like that into motion.
Well, that's what's typically referred to as a single-payer system, where the government takes over the healthcare system, if you will, and then says we'll provide care to everyone free. And free means, of course, that we'll provide it out of your tax money. So you raise the taxes for everyone quite substantially, and then you say, okay, you can now go get health care from the government. The problem that's occurred in countries where that's happened is that you end up having everybody standing in line, because if something's free, why, we're all going to get as much of it as we can. People stand in line for these health care services, and they want enormous health care services provided, and the government has to draw lines and say, well, we're sorry, we just can't provide this for you. And the way they do that is they put people, in England they call it queues, and in Canada the same thing. They put you in long lines, and you'll get your appointment for your MRI to see what's wrong with your knee as soon as you get to the front of the line. Well, that might take a year or 2 years, and by that time your sickness may be more severe. It's a form of rationing, and it has a devastating effect in places like Canada, because at the end of the year they run out of money in Canada, and for the last month or two they can't perform any surgeries other than emergency surgery, life-threatening surgery, but other things are just delayed because they don't have enough money in the Canadian system to pay for all the health care demand.
Well, I understand that, and from what I hear in Canada, you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can get a major surgery. But as far as when I was in Germany, I visited, and I was on my brother's health care over there, and I had to see a dentist, and it was all paid for because my brother lived there and worked there, and it was all paid for. But back here in the States, you're billed for every single thing, even down to a Band-Aid. Over there, they'll tax you, and cigarettes are higher, gas is higher, but you see less, I think you see people living better over there because of the way the healthcare system is.
But you would agree, excuse me, Mitt, for jumping in there, but you would agree, I think, that the healthcare, in fact, is not free. They're just paying for it through higher taxes.
Right, and where the higher taxes are, people are living better, I think, over there because they're more respect for doctors over there than they are here, and they're living better over there because they're getting better service too.
Well, I guess if you're talking about health care, I believe that if you asked a German or you asked a Canadian, have you ever heard of an American flying to your country to get health care? They'd never have heard of such a thing.
Right.
Instead, Canadians and Germans fly here to get health care here when they're seriously ill, those that can afford to do so. Because I think without question, we have the best health care system in the world in terms of the quality of the care. What we've got to do now is make sure that the 10 to 15% of our citizens that don't have good access to it get much better access to the best system in the world. Now, you said something I missed. You want to repeat that? I didn't quite hear you.
Yeah, what was that about? I'm sorry. Because I'm having trouble with the phone here.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you had another point to make there.
No, what I was basically saying was that, sure, taxes are higher over there, but they tax the cigarettes and the gasoline. But also people in Germany have a better, companies over there will send their employees to healthcare facilities to make sure they have a better life and so they don't get sick. Over here in the States, you basically If you're sick, you go to the hospital or whatever, and companies just basically want you there to work, and they don't, it just seems to me that in Germany, it's a better way of taking care of their employees.
It sounds awfully nice. I had an office in Germany and actually was an investor in a company in Germany, and the experience of my people there is that they preferred the health system here to the health system they had in Germany. And things sometimes look very good when you're coming in from the outside, but they pay dearly for their health care system. It's an enormous tax burden, which they have in that country, a massive tax system, and they don't have, I believe, anywhere near the quality of health care that we have in this country. And our problem is not let's throw out the whole health care system, but rather let's get the last 10 to 15% who don't have health insurance and who don't have coverage, let's get them insured and get them covered.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it. But, of course, taxes have to go up for that to happen, though.
What has to go up?
Taxes.
No, taxes don't have to go up. That's the good news. Taxes don't have to go up to get all of our people insured.
Well, I can see that cigarette tax going up. I think that's a great idea, because then again, if cigarette taxes went up, maybe more people quit smoking, and it would make people live a healthier life. Unfortunately, I smoke and I hate it. And if cigarette tax went up, I might quit myself.
Caller, can I leave you with one thought? Sorry, Mitt. Can I leave you one thought, and we'll go to another call? It's also worth bearing in mind that Germany, now that it's united, but even West Germany, 40% of the labor force is a member of a union.
Right.
In this country, it's only 16%. As a result of that, Germany has the highest labor costs in the world. Right. And they are now struggling. They are still in a very deep recession because they're having so much trouble selling their goods. I bring all that up because the employers in Germany have to, by the fact that the unions demand it, pay medical costs to make sure they have universal coverage.
Right.
There's always good news, bad news. But thanks for calling tonight, and we're going to go on to another call.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. By the way, callers, if you do want these tickets to the play this weekend, mention it to Peter when you call in. Hello, you're on Town Talk.
Hi.
Hello.
I got a couple of questions for Mr. Romney. He says he wants to put welfare recipients to work. Number one, where can these jobs come from? And number two, does he favor an increase in the minimum wage? I'll hang up and listen to his response.
Okay, thanks for calling.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Mitt, where are these jobs coming from?
Well, we have right now in Massachusetts roughly 3 million jobs, 3 million employed people. And we have about 45,000 people on welfare who are able-bodied, who don't have preschoolers at home that could work. And I must admit, given the fact we have 3 million jobs, it's not much of a stretch to me to think we could have 3,045,000 jobs. They're there. Get out the classifieds. They're not all $8 and $9 jobs. They may be $5 jobs per hour, but they're jobs that are there. And if we tell people who are on welfare, we want you to get a job, we want to give the employer that hires you a credit for doing so, an extra credit for hiring you off of welfare. And if for some reason we can't find you one, if you're in an area that just doesn't have any employment, we'll get you one in government. Or if we don't have anything there that we can do in government, we'll have you work for a charity. And so we're going to have people work either in the private sector, in the public sector, or actually in the voluntary sector to make sure that everyone has the opportunity and the dignity of being able to work for a job. With regards to minimum wage, I don't think the answer for making us all a wealthier nation is to raise and raise and raise the minimum wage, but I do think it ought to keep up with inflation.
Do you think, Mitt, in fact, there should be a minimum wage?
I think it makes sense to have a minimum wage in our country, yes.
Mm-hmm. I always think of a minimum wage as being inflationary in its mere existence, i.e., if employers can't pay someone $3, they have to pay them $4.50. Therefore, inflation goes with it. I just wonder. But you think we should have a minimum wage?
I think if you took a minimum wage well above the standards that were being paid in industry, why it would be inflationary. But if it stays roughly in accordance with the standards of the industry and it moves only with inflation or roughly inflation, then I don't think it has that inflationary pressure. It basically keeps up with inflation and sets a standard for industries across the country.
Okay. Okay, we're going to take another break. We'll be back in about 90 seconds. We're going to talk about the environment. When we come back, 388-5900, please give us a call. Thank you.
It takes 500,000 trees just to produce our Sunday newspapers. We throw out enough aluminum cans every 3 months to rebuild our entire commercial air fleet. And in Massachusetts, the average citizen throws away 7 pounds of trash every day. But this waste can be stopped. Today, many cities and towns in Massachusetts are operating local recycling programs. Support recycling in your community. Stop throwing it all away.
Hi, I'm Paul Geiger, host of the Top 10 Pay-Per-View Movie Countdown Show. Join us each month as we review the top 10 Hollywood blockbusters available on pay-per-view. We'll give you the inside scoop with star interviews, behind-the-scenes, movie previews, and more. And remember, why go out and rent it when you can stay at home and order it on pay-per-view?
Welcome back, folks. Tonight my guest is Mitt Romney, and I'm going to take, if you don't mind, just 30 seconds to do some housekeeping. And you know what it is, don't you? Yes, it's the petition. The petition is going very well, as it has been from day one. This week alone, I've collected 150 signatures. So we're well on the way. And of course, the Woodsum Farm Festival is coming up this weekend. And I'm going to be roaming around for a period of time with one of these signs. If you haven't signed the petition, please do. And I'm going to get into it a bit more later on, not this show, but in October. I've heard some rumors that people think I've lost my momentum on this issue. Wrong. And I'm going to dedicate a show to the charter update, okay? And by then, I hope that we'll be very close to getting it done. So let me get this out of the way. Very important issue in town here, Mitt, about the form of government we have and how many of us would like to see it change for the better. But I'll be doing a charter petition program exclusively sometime in the very near future and wrap that baby up and move on to charter commission nominations. Okay, let's talk about the environment, if we may. This came in the mail, and if any of you get the Amesbury News, you got this as well. It says, look for local advertising inside. Well, that's fine. But look at the size of the piece of paper they used to show me these advertisements. Now, give me a break. I mean, really, I don't know what the cost of paper is, but look at the size of this piece here. How many trees had to go through the mill to come up with this? I mean, this is ridiculous, and it's not Amesbury News' fault. I mean, they're owned by a bigger company. But I bring this out, one, I was going to bring it out anyway, regardless of who my guest was, because I don't like this. This annoys me. But Mitt, tell me, what are your views on the environment? That is to say, we've recently cleaned up the Merrimack River, and everyone is concerned, of course, about the proverbial ozone layer. But please tell me, is industrial development good? Should we cut down the rainforest? Give me your opinion.
Well, I think we'll all agree on most of the matters that relate to the environment, and that is we want clean water, we want clean air, we don't want to have wasteful use of resources, as that certainly appears to be. And you know, it's a constant fight. We're going to have to go area after area and say, what's our highest priority? Let's focus on that one and get it fixed. For instance, that paper. I'm hopeful we're going to see a major new recycling paper mill in New England, such that we don't have to worry so much about cutting down trees, because we'll keep recycling our paper and recycling it. That makes a big difference. And if we can do that throughout our industries, I think it makes sense. I agree with a lot of environmentalists that most of the time good environmental practice doesn't hurt business, because cutting down emissions on automobiles on a understandable and predictable basis can actually make us more competitive on a global basis and make our automobiles the leader in environmental cleanliness. Likewise, cutting down on emissions from our plants. It's a good idea. We develop new technology in environmental science that we can sell around the world. So those things don't have to be in conflict. Sometimes, however, we become a little nutty in what we do, and we sacrifice our growth and our development for something that's not a real problem. And there are circumstances where that happens. Some of the Superfund legislation keeps companies from coming to cities and building in cities. That makes no sense. We don't want companies going out and cutting down trees to build their new plants. We want companies to go where there have been plants before. So we're going to need to get some waivers of some of these regulations that just don't make sense. But by and large, our environmental regulations do make sense, and we have to be mindful that we're passing along a country to our kids. We're passing along a national balance sheet. Right now it's got $4.5 trillion of debt. That's immoral. We got to fix that. But we're also passing along an environment. And we should do our part not to degrade it even further, but rather to try and upgrade it and to bring it back to more of the cleanliness it had in the past.
Okay, let's see who's line 1. Thank you for holding. You're on Town Talk.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
Yes?
Yes, you're on Town Talk. Hello, thank you for holding.
Mr. Romney?
Yes.
Mr. Romney?
Yes, you got me.
Okay. I pray to God every night you'll get in.
That's you and me. That's you and me both.
I just had a big fight with a friend of mine tonight. I said, after reading Boston Magazine, how could anybody not vote for you?
Well, you're very kind.
You remind me of the old senators like Dirksen and Taft and Cabot, Lodge and Salstow. And who was the one from your father's home state? Vandermeer?
Oh boy, that's a long Vanderjack.
Oh, I'm not young, you know.
Vanderjack.
Well, I wish you the very best of luck, and I'm telling you, I pray every night you'll get in. Because I haven't had a senator from Massachusetts since John Kennedy beat Cabot Lodge.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Like 52, 53 or something?
It's been a long time. You're very kind.
And I don't have to ask you any questions because I know you think just the way I do.
Well, thanks very much for calling.
Thank you, and I wish you the best of luck, Mr. Romney.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching.
I really appreciate my mother calling like that.
I was going to say, that was from your car phone. I know that was from your car phone. Okay. Now, let's talk about that. Let's say you are sent to Washington.
Yeah.
The Senate is a very elite group. Now, 100 men and women out of 260 million Americans are sitting in that room. They have privileges and opportunities that none of us ever see. And if you get there, you're going to see them. And one thing that really annoys me, if you don't mind me telling you, is that the people down there, these 100 senators and the congressmen, are making decisions on my health care, their health care, and they have the best health care plan in the world. They go to Walter Reed Hospital if they get a sore toe.
It's not just there. It's not only do they have the best health care, they have their own private subway system. I understand for a tune of $18 million, they put in a new subway between the Senate office building and Congress that saves, I don't know, 4 or 5 seconds from the trip. I mean, it's extraordinary. And when they pass laws, anti-discrimination laws and things of that nature, they always exempt Congress from those laws.
Right.
Look, that makes no sense. People who go to Washington should live like Americans, not like monarchs.
Right.
And we should say that any law that's passed by Congress applies to Congress as well as to the rest of us.
Right.
And the special privileges that are in Washington shouldn't apply to people in Washington unless they apply to all of us. And I mean, there's something that seems to happen to people when they drink that water around the Capitol, and that is not only do they think they're above living the way the rest of us do, but they also think they can create mandates that tell us how we have to manage our lives. These clean water mandates that have been placed on some towns and cities, Salem, Boston, Fall River, that say you've got to spend hundreds of millions of dollars and we're not even going to put the money in there for you, they make no sense. And that kind of attitude has to change.
Yeah. And the founding fathers of this country are spinning in their graves watching what's going on down there in Washington.
Well, I think the founding fathers had the idea that, like them, the people who went there would not be professional politicians, but that they would be people from average walks of life, business people, teachers, scholars, whatever. And they'd go and they'd serve, and then they'd go home, and they'd live the rest of their life earning their living, preparing for their pension, their retirement. But instead, today we have people who go there and who think, once I'm here, I should be here forever. And they justify that by saying, look at all the pork I can give you. In my view, that's just wrong-headed. Yeah. We've got to say, let's send down people who've lived in the real world.
Well, if you go to Washington, Amesbury, Salisbury, Merrimack are going to keep a good eye on you. So don't forget it. Let's take a call. Hello, you're on Town Talk. Thanks for holding.
Hi, Paul. I'd like to speak with Mitt.
How are you? You got me.
Okay. My big question is, I'm on Social Security. 30, I'm covered by Medicare. I'm also covered by Mass Health. Okay? My big worry is about people like my fiance who work like dogs and have no medical coverage. Okay? If he gets sick, if he gets pneumonia, I mean, if he has some kind of problem with himself, he has no coverage. Now, I'm sure over the past few days you have noticed that, you know, Kennedy and the whole Kennedy clan, and a lot of people have been saying that the rich are covered, the poor are covered. The middle class isn't. And that's what's really disturbing me, because my fiance, he works like a dog. He deserves, I mean, if he cuts himself at work and he needs to be helped, he should be able to walk into a hospital, get some treatment for himself, and not be charged for it. And the thing is, you know, I truly do not believe. My big question for you is, how do you plan to supply medical coverage for middle-class people without taxing them?
Well, let's talk specifically about two different groups, okay? You can't make money come out of the air and say we're going to give medical coverage to everybody and it's not going to cost anybody anything. That doesn't happen. It's not the real world. You're not willing to work for a medical provider unless you're going to get paid, so there has to be money that comes from somewhere. But let's take somebody who doesn't have the money to buy health insurance. We have to provide a subsidy for those people. We have to give them the ability to get health insurance. And by the way, if your fiance got really sick, I don't want to scare anybody here, if they became really sick and needed emergency care, by law in this state, a hospital has to take them in even if they don't have any money. But if he can't afford medical coverage, he's got to be able to get a subsidy to make sure he can get medical coverage. And if he can't afford it, and if he has the ability to buy it, he ought to buy it, and he ought to be able to buy it for the same price a big company can pay for it, and he ought to be able to have the same kinds of policies that are offered in big companies.
Well, my situation is where I have seen him unemployed, nothing coming in, okay? He has high blood pressure and heart problems, okay? Nobody wants to touch him, okay? He wound up going to an experimental clinic to be treated for the problems that he has, okay? And my thing is, you know, he pays his taxes every year. Every year he gives this government money. Every year he pays in, and he pays in, and he pays in, just like every growing adult American.
Can I ask you, caller, has he considered purchasing health insurance?
How can he afford that when he has a wedding coming up, 2 children to provide for? You know, he pays child support for his daughter. He's helping me raise my child. How in God's name? Paying rent, paying bills, paying car payments, gas.
We got the point. He can't afford it. If he can't afford it, then he should get a subsidy. If he can't afford it, we should make it easier for him to get it, get the price of the policies such that he can afford the policy. So it's either one or the other. If he can afford it, we should make it easier for him to get it. If he can't afford it, we should provide a subsidy so he has sufficient money to be able to purchase health care insurance. That's what we need for every American.
Well, you want to be a state representative?
No, I don't. I want to be a United States Senator.
Okay, you want to be a United States Senate.
Right.
But I've known him to go down to the welfare department and ask for Medicare coverage because he's out of work. He's got no money coming in. If anything is to happen to him, and you know what they say to him? You can't be covered. And that's the bureaucracy. That's what I'm worried about. You know, I mean, when I heard Clinton say that he was going to take care of, you know, universal health care, I was elated. Because there's a lot of people I know. My oldest son's father had to have heart surgery. You know, he had nothing. He had no money. He's out in Colorado. Thank God Colorado's different than Massachusetts. They support the people who live and work and support the community. And I think that every town or every city should should take in their own control and their own hands the protection of their community, whether they're poor, rich, or middle class.
Okay, call it.
Stand up against it and help each other, just like in the old days. What happened to the old days when the guy got laid off from his job?
Hold on here for just a second. They're apparently running low on time. I should tell you that I agree that every American should have health coverage, and that's something we've got to do. And I'm not sure that you've got exactly the right idea for getting there. I've got different ideas than you do, but one thing I'm sure of, we need to make sure that all Americans have health coverage, and we get to a program that people don't have to worry about being able to receive that care.
Thanks, caller. We're going to go on to the next call. I've been waiting kindly.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Okay, one more call. Hello, you're on Town Talk.
Yeah, I'd like to know what Mr. Romney would do about the sagging fishing industry on a federal level with all the regulations that we have and everything like that. It's a dying industry locally. And
okay.
I couldn't quite hear the question, Paul.
Would you like to repeat it, caller, or shall I ask it for you?
You can ask it for me.
Okay.
Stop and listen.
Okay. Are you going to go?
Yep.
Okay, thanks for calling. The caller would like to know what you're going to do for the Massachusetts fishing industry, which he regards as a dying industry.
Yes. Well, Amendment 5 was passed, as you may know, and the federal government stepped in and said it's going to create rules that apply to the entire fishing industry. And instead of taking the Gloucester Plan, which was developed by fishermen in Gloucester, and which really dealt with the needs of the fishing industry with the input of fishermen, they put in place an expert plan that created Amendment 5, which I think is a mistake. In my view, what the fishing industry needs is much closer to the Gloucester Plan, and that's what we should have had implemented.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the last call we're going to take tonight. Mitt, I'm going to give you as much time as you would like to make a closing statement, because we're going to wrap the show up.
Okay.
Be my guest.
Terrific. Well, I'll tell you, I get up in the morning, as I said, and I see my 5 sons and daughter-in-law, and I'm concerned about the direction we're going in as a country. I'm concerned that we have more crime than we've had in decades. I'm concerned that our welfare system isn't working for us. I'm concerned that we're not creating the jobs we need to create to make sure every American has the opportunity for a good job. And in my view, it's time for a change in direction. I want this country to be based upon the fundamental American principles that have always worked. Work with welfare, absolutely essential. I want crime to be punished swiftly and surely and with tough punishments. And I want to make sure that we do everything in our power to create the good jobs that all of our people need. And that's the job that I'm going after.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show, Mitt.
Thank you.
Good luck with your campaign.
Appreciate it.
My guest next week is going to be, in fact, Edward Kennedy, our senator, in a recorded interview that I did earlier this week. There will not be any phone calls directly to the senator, but the show will be an hour and we'll discuss his interview. So that's next Thursday. We're going to have Ted Kennedy on the show. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be here again, you lucky people, 2 nights in 1 week. I'm going to have Jim Jajuga and Jim Fiorentini in what will be their last debate before the primary on the 20th. That will be tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Okay? Please watch that. It's going to be an interesting discussion, to say the least. Okay. Don't forget, in Salisbury, October 6th, there's a Walk for Hunger. I mentioned it last week. I told them I'd mention it twice. And one last thing. My mother joined us today from England. She's on a short holiday, and it's the first time that she's seen Town Talk. Hello, Mum. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And that's Town Talk, Mum. Told you all about it. Okay, we're out of here. Mitt, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the time. See you tomorrow night. You've been watching Town Talk. I'm Paul Knight, and thanks for watching.